Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the third talk in the series on austerities as given by the mother. And today's topic is we'll be speaking about the mental austerity, focusing on the speech aspect of it, that how speaking takes a toll. And the irony is that we're going to speak about it. So, yeah, that is how the human world is, that we talk about how to not talk about. So, we'll be like sharing this space. And yes, so I will request Ramesh Bhaiya to start the session.
Thank you, Aditi, for a short and sweet and humorous introduction. Uh, in these sessions on austerity that we have been doing for the last few weeks, we have seen that the mother does not interpret austerity in a way that is pretty common, that is doing with as little as we can as a sort of a bravado, trying to show off that I can do with so little. But rather, what she's talking about is a self-imposed restraint so that we can direct our energies as much as possible to what really matters in life, to avoid distractions, to avoid dissipation of energy. That's what she's talking about. In case of the physical austerity, uh, observing a total fast for a day is easier than eating just as much as we need and just what we should eat all the time. In the same way, in case of the austerity of the vital, that the emotions, we saw that it's not that we have to kill our emotions, but we should educate, refine, and purify them. When it comes to mental austerity, which Sri Aurobindo and the mother use for the intellect, the thinking part of the mind, the mother essentially sort of focuses on austerity of speech. That is what we speak. And this may, in the beginning, look a little surprising why, when we are talking about mental austerity as a whole, that is austerity of the intellect, why just this focus on speaking? Because that's not all what the intellect does. But then, if one goes a little deeper, one realizes that there's great insight into this restraint on speaking. Because the very business of the intellect is to think, and its output is prolific. We know that the thoughts keep coming and going at such amazing speed, and further that these thoughts translate into words, and that is what translates into speaking, speaking to others, and sometimes speaking to ourselves. But all the same, it is speaking. And especially those of us who have seen people who have the gift of the gab, we can see how they can go on speaking. They speak and they think, and what they think, they speak. It seems as if one thought is leading to another in an unending fashion, and they're just going into giving it a verbal expression. But then, if we also reflect a little, we realize that there is very little of what we think and very little of what we translate into words, which is really necessary. So, the basic thing is that we tend to think a lot, much more than is necessary. And all these thoughts come dressed up in words, and therefore we end up speaking them. And much of our thoughts are unnecessary, and much of what we speak is also unnecessary. And therefore, it translates into speaking as little as we can. And again, as in the case of food, it's much easier to observe a total fast for a day. Sorry, not total fast. It's much easier to stay completely silent for a day than to speak as much as is necessary all the time. And I hope we observe it while we are speaking, although we shall speak because that is what is Swadharma today, but we shall try to say in as few words as possible what we want to say. And so, with this, let me share the screen now. So, speaking does take a lot of energy, and apart from that, it takes a toll in so many ways, and therefore, austerity of speech is important. And we saw why and how mental austerity translates into, in fact, austerity of speech. Uh, and here is what the mother is saying about a total silence, what we call Maun Vrat, as against speaking as little as possible, just what is necessary. Apart from very few exceptions, it is absolute silence that is put against unbridled talkativeness. So it's not putting one against the other. It's just a conscious, self-imposed restraint on how much we speak as little as we can, and only what is necessary. And of course, not only the quantity of the speech that is important, it's also the quality. And to some extent, if we are conscious about speaking less, the quality will also improve, because it's only when we are not conscious of what we are speaking that we tend to be talkative. Or rather, when we are talkative, we cannot be conscious of what we are speaking. And therefore, consciously restraining ourselves to what is really necessary would also improve the quality of what we speak. And by talkativeness, the mother means not just having the gift of the gab, but something which most of us tend to do sometime or the other, that is uttering words that are actually dispensable, or utter words that are not indispensable. So mental austerity essentially translates into speaking only as much as is necessary. And to bring out this point, the mother goes into further why we speak at all. And she lists a number of reasons, which cover, in fact, a pretty wide spectrum of the reasons why we speak. We may speak for a material reason, that is, for something concrete. Please come here, go there, get me this thing, that thing. Okay, I'm leaving. Bye. See you in the evening. No, things of that sort. Those are for material reasons. But then again, that can also be usually managed with far fewer words if we are aware of the habits of the people who talk to us about these things. Uh, we more or less know, even without speaking, what is expected, what might be communicated. Lot can be done through gestures, and a lot of what is unnecessary can be dispensed with. For example, while saying goodbye to somebody, uh, sometimes you find that the goodbye itself gets prolonged. There's one goodbye said inside the room, and another at the door, and a third one immediately outside the door, and fourth when the person is being seen off at the car. So the goodbye becomes interminable, and it could have been so much shorter. And perhaps the word goodbye could have also been dispensed with a smile or a hug or something like that. So usually, one can manage with far fewer words than are generally used, even for material reasons. And the less we speak for these material reasons, this outer silence translates into inner peace, something which we are all looking for all the time. Another reason we speak is to express feelings. And it is here that austerity is extremely useful, especially when it comes to negative feelings like anger. Because if we give ourselves time before we actually speak and decide what is it really necessary, most of the time we would find that it was not necessary to speak at all. And a lot of quarrels and misunderstandings could be avoided if we take time to reflect before giving vent to our feelings, such as anger. And therefore, austerity of speech, when it comes to expressing feelings, avoids many quarrels and prevents polluting the atmosphere with bad vibrations. Because uh, when we speak in anger, it not only affects us, it also affects the atmosphere, and the vibrations that go into the atmosphere uh, are contagious, spread, and can affect others too. Then we speak sometimes to talk about others, and quite often behind their back. This, in fact, is the most undesirable thing to do. And what are we doing? We are judging people in that situation. So, to judge them, that too behind their back, and that too most of the time unfavorably, is something most undesirable. The yoga teacher, B.K.S. Iyengar, while talking about the yamas and niyamas, one of the yamas is asteya, that is not stealing. He said that talking ill of somebody behind somebody's back is also a sort of a theft. How you are stealing the person's reputation. So, one can interpret in so many ways, but the main thing is that we should not be talking about others. And quite often it takes the form of gossip. Uh, it's a pastime, we say that's a good pastime, interesting pastime, as if time is something which is meant to be killed. And here is it that we have found a most interesting way to kill it. Time, in fact, is a precious resource. It should be conserved rather than uh, our feeling necessary to pass it by something as unnecessary and as degrading as gossip. Here is something very valuable that the mother has said about gossiping. Gossip about what somebody is doing or not doing is wrong. To listen to such gossip is wrong. To verify if such gossip is true is wrong. To retaliate in words against a false gossip is wrong. The whole affair is a very bad way of wasting one's time and lowering one's consciousness. So, both the person who gossips and the one who listens to this gossip, for both, there is some very valuable piece of advice here. And yet, we know how common it is and how useless it is and how damaging it can be to the consciousness. Because on the spiritual path, essentially everything that we do uh, translates into either raising our consciousness or lowering our consciousness, and we should try and do what raises it rather than lowers it. So it's a very bad way of wasting one's time and lowering one's consciousness, gossiping. But then there are exceptions. One might have to talk about others as a duty. For example, somebody is heading a department and he has to uh, talk about others, say in the confidential report, or he has to criticize somebody because he wants that person to do better. Now, whether it is uh, in this type of a situation or otherwise, again, one can do with fewer words, one can do it in a better way. And certainly, one thing which should not be done is to do it in the presence of others, not behind the back and not in the presence of others. It should be done with that person on a one to one basis. And also, as a duty, one is pointing out what the person should not do. That doesn't mean that we do not love the person. The two can be separated. So one has to keep it apart. One has to sort of not form a permanent opinion about that person on the basis of a few things which we have come to dislike in that person. So whenever a file concerning that person comes, we don't have to just think, oh, hai aisa. This person is like that, and therefore this is how I will decide on this file. The file has to be looked at in terms of on its own merits. What is that type of action that actually should be taken, irrespective of how much I like or dislike this person, which means that one doesn't have to be permanently biased about it. So even when one has to do it as a duty, it should be treated as a duty. Something interesting which the mother has said somewhere is, do not uh, criticize someone unless you have it in you the power to change what makes the person do it, which means that you don't have to just change the behavior of the person. You should be conscious that do you have the power to change that in the person which makes him do it, which means something basic in the nature of the person. For example, somebody is in the habit of coming late every day. Hmm? Then naturally you point it out. One way would be that one thing one could do is to tell the person to come on time, and when the person, because of the fear of punishment or uh, whatever, may start coming on time. But then what is it that made the person come late? Was it that the person gets up late? Is it that the person does it as a matter of habit? Uh, Now, have you been able to change that in the person? And that might happen more easily. I mean, that could also happen if instead of just telling the person to come on time, one tries to go a little deeper and see what is it that makes the person late, or is it something absolutely unavoidable which the person has to do in the morning and which cannot be finished on time, and therefore the person is late. There could be so many reasons. So one should try and see whether one can change in the person that which makes the person do what the person is doing, which we do not like. Now, here is a interesting sort of a triple filter. Once somebody uh, told Socrates, one of his friends, whispered into his ear, "I'll tell you something about somebody else." So then Socrates said, "Oh, just hold on. Are you sure that what you're going to tell me about that person is really true?" He said, "Well, I'm not sure whether it is true. I just heard it from somebody." Then Socrates asked him, "Are you going to tell me something good about that person?" He said, "No, it's not really something good that I'm going to tell you." Then he asked him, uh, "Is what you're going to tell me uh, going to be of any use to me? Will it help me in any way?" He said, "No, not really." So he said, "Then don't tell it to me." So this is Socrates' triple filter. Now, here is something which one may find a little surprising. As a general rule, the less one speaks of others, even if it be in praise of them, the better it is. Now, when it comes to speaking in praise of somebody, uh, probably the part that the less one speaks is really important, because sometimes one does have to speak in praise of somebody. And that may seem something which is beyond objection. But again, uh, we don't have to speak more than is necessary. One can convey what one has to convey if one is sincere about it in very few words. It's the sincerity behind the praise rather than the words used and the uh, number of words used, which is important. And this may be required for various reasons. Ideally, it should not be necessary, because if a person is doing his duty properly in the spirit of karma yoga, he does it without expecting any praise. He's getting an inner reward. He does not expect any praise from outside. But uh, given the typical human nature and our weaknesses and frailties, some encouragement in the form of praise does improve performance of many people, and therefore praise may be in order. And even otherwise, praise may also reflect our love for that person, our sincerity, our sense of gratitude. Now, all these things can be expressed when we are praising somebody. So, therefore, it's not strictly sort of prohibited, but same time, even that should have more of sincerity in it, and should be as selfless as possible. Should not be with a motive. Without a motive, selflessly and sincerely, one can praise somebody in as few words as possible, and the motive and the sincerity would show in so many ways. It can usually be judged easily by anyone who is listening to it. So, with this, I'll stop here and pass on to Aditi for her reflections.
I was just wondering when you were sharing about the filter, that how is it important and it will benefit me or so what made me realize is that essentially we use speech as a field of expression, that all of us really want to express ourselves, and speech is one of the very fundamental aspect of that. I have an experience, I want to share it. And we have always observed that when we are very excited, if something very good has happened to us, we immediately want to just go out and give it expression, give it words, and say, hey, listen, this is what happened to me, or this is what I want to share with you. So essentially, all of us associate speech with expression, and expression as a sense of completion. That if something has come out of me, it has reached somebody, so I have reached somebody. So essentially, the other person or group of people are saying that, okay, you exist. So essentially, every expression comes from a need of validation of your existence. And that is why when we are very worked up and we are very like not in touch with our own selves, we are so much outward oriented, because that is the crucial time where we are seeking that, oh, please tell me I exist, please tell me I exist, because I'm not connected. And that is where we are also disconnected with our own self. And that is when speech goes in different direction. The words are not what, and especially that is what happens, no, when we are upset, when we are angry, when we are fighting. Most of the time when we get like settled after the fight, when we reflect, it's like, okay, I didn't mean this. It was not really what I was like supposed to say. It just came out of me. That is usually a reflection. So what does that mean? That when I'm not connected, then what are the words that are coming? They don't hold that purity, because behind expression is words. behind words is thought, behind thought is imagination, and behind imagination is the self talk, the sense of who I am. So, over all the years of my life, whatever I've built so far, that who I am, what my life is, what my structure is, or how the world is treating me, how I'm treating the world, that is a parallel story that runs behind, which gives me a sense of who I am. When any disturbance happens there, disturbance happens in the outside world. And that often speech is that connecting factor. So the more I feel settled with my own relation with my own self, the more I will feel the less need to speak. So that is how the inward approach to austerity comes in. So it's not like a mental control that, oh, I'm not supposed to speak. It is like I will not have that urge to express, to prove something, but my expression will more be an offering. So my offering can be in silence because I have a little world of my own where I'm connected. So when required, I can speak because I have that awareness. But when not required, I can be silent. So with the same intensity, I can be silent. With the same intensity, I can speak when required. And that is the balance that comes in. And that becomes a very natural way of expression because an expression is not my identity. And of course, also when we look at it, no, usually why are our expressions so disturbing or not well articulated? Because also that expression, if we just physiologically also look at this, no, it's the head and the heart through in between the expression comes in. So every time we say something when they are not connected, expression creates a problem. So our first thing is that can expression be a form of balance of my head and heart? But for that balance is where the self work is required. So when we say that, okay, why is silence important? Because it's in the silence of speech when observation of thought can happen. So when I'm not talking, when I'm in silence, and I can really observe myself. And with observation, then control can come in. That what needs to be expressed, what doesn't need to be expressed, what will just pass. So sometimes we just have that impulse that rises from the lower sense that, oh, immediately I want to say it. But when that impulse is rising, instead of like pouring it on the outside through words, can I pour inside in silence? And because inside I have that sense of self, it expands, it merges. So then my impulse to share goes down. So if I use that as a practice, that immediately when I want to share, I feel that urge because it's only the impulse that pushes to share. Otherwise, when we are really in our experience, we want to share, but there's no urge, there's no push. There's a some sense of vastness where we can hold. It's like, okay, when I'll meet that person, I'll share. I was like, I'm immediately text and share. That is the difference between sharing from that impulse and sharing just for the joy of sharing, for the love of sharing. So just beginning to observe in my life, in my own experience, when do I have that urge to share? When can I hold that sharing? And not saying that, oh, you're not supposed to share, but can I delay the sharing? Or does delaying the sharing delays the joy? If that is the case, then am I not able to distinguish between immediate gratification and the joy of giving and sharing? So just exploring without any identification that no, this should not be done. But it's like, okay, how am I processing it? So if there's a thought which is more like one of the factor, if you observe, a lot of people have this habit of repetition. So what they're saying, they will say it two, three times, which is like really that what is the quality of the physical? The quality of the physical is repetition because it understands through multiplicity. So it's a habit. That is why we have difficulty in changing things at the physical level because it needs a lot of repetitions. So if I'm a person who's mainly rooted in my physical awareness, who's not so much aware of the larger context or the vastness, then I'll observe that I'm repeating things a lot. So, can I then raise that awareness and offer it to the inner part of my existence? If I'll observe that I'm very like very volatile, very like if I'm more of a vital person, more of an emotional person, then my expression holds that urge of satisfaction because the tendency of vital is satisfaction. So it's like if I told you do this, immediately do this, then time doesn't exist. For vital, time doesn't exist. So if I said I love you to you, immediately you say I love you too. You will not take that break. Or if I told you to please keep this book there, you immediately keep that book there. Because vital brings in a lot of power. It brings in a lot of that push that it needs immediate completion. So observe when you are giving instructions, like you were talking about, no, to subordinates, if you're a department head, you need to speak. Yes, you need to speak, but how are you speaking? If you're in a position of authority, but your authority has a force, which is like you should be doing it or you should do it. So, what is the intention that my voice, that sound is carrying? And of course, that mental space of understanding. So, sometimes we observe that if I'm just in my head reading something, I'll not understand. But if I'll say it loud, maybe I'll understand it better because then I'm also hearing it and just getting that sense of understanding. So some people read aloud to make sense of things. So just observe before reaching that okay, should I do it or should I not do it? How do I use it? So in my daily activities, what is the role speech plays? Does it play a role in my understanding more, in my sense of satisfaction more, in terms of just securing myself? We feel no, if we repeat a lot, it means we that weight of that thing has increased. That it carries more value. So just as a person to understand my own self better, what role does speech play in its association with all the parts? And most importantly, how do we use, because essentially when we talk about speech, we're talking about words. So how do I use words in relation to my own self? So one can be that I'm practicing the austerity of speech and I'm being silent, but my self-talk is full of negative words. That I'm somebody who speaks a lot, I'm somebody who should not speak, I should like really adhere to mental austerity. So even if I'm not uttering those words on the outside, the speech to myself is so negative that is it's impacting my relation with my own self and also with the world. So austerity of speech is not just expression on the outside, but self-expression as well. That what is my own message to my own self? What am I communicating on a daily basis? So on the outside, I can be very silent, speak only when required. But the radio that is playing inside is of the highest order of the words that are only telling me that how unworthy I am or how difficult I am. So that level of discipline is also to be brought into what are the choice of words, because words or sound in that sense is nothing but vibration. So when we go quiet on the outside, like when we really silence the noise, that is when we hear the voice. So the inner voice comes out when the outer noise is like really quiet and silent. So that is the fundamental purpose of being inwards, that I'm quietening the noise. But one, I can quieten the noise on the outside, but then quieten the noise in my head about my thoughts. So once I quieten the noise here, then I can reach to the sound or the voice inside my heart. And that is when we say, no, that the absolute, the core sound of, say, when we say about the universe, when we talk about Om, or just that basic sound, it's in silence and we actually hear the true sound. Because silence is the basis of that sound. So silence is also important to actually hear what is supposed to be spoken, what is supposed to be shared. So that becomes a circle, that we are so much in the outside world of talking, of speaking, because we want to, have that sense of existence. But it's in silence that we actually become aware of the core of existence. And that is the, even if you imagine it for a moment, that is what completes the circle. That from silence originates the true sound. And if you're able to access that sound or experience that sound, on that basis, when you bring in your human expression, that is when you speak the truth. That is what expression of truth happens. And this becomes a journey. So for that is when, especially even say when mother speaks about the qualities, all of those qualities are essentially bringing us to make this bridge, that an inner purification is required to utter the right kind of words. It cannot be just by a mental understanding. But when you talk about purification, when you were speaking about sincerity, all of those things, that when to speak and when not to speak, comes in from purity of intention. To exactly know, to really like how in very common language we say, read the room. But it's more like reading that spiritual room within. That when is it required to be and when it's required to like really act. And that can be done when we're not identifying ourselves with one particular thing, that, oh, it should not be done, or oh, this should be done. So just moving beyond that and really, because if I have mastered or become more observant of the self talk, the speech of self narrative, I will see most of my issues in the world will solve. because the seed of excessive talking or bad talking or gossiping comes with a disconnect between me and the inner self of me. So that disconnection leads to excess expression. This stability stabilizes the outer connection. So just if we can bring these two together in my awareness, so what is the origin of speech inside of me? What is the purpose of it? And how I'm using it as an instrument of identification, instrument of expression, instrument of connection. So these things will, and from a sense of purity and silence. Yeah, I think that is where I can sense like whatever you were sharing, this is what came to me to just kind of lay the framework of developing my individual relationship with speech in the universal context. So this framework, if I can apply on a daily basis, then I think things will unfold for each individual. So yeah, that is what I wanted to share. Thank you.
As usual, Aditi's reflection always brings out something valuable. And today, what struck me the most was the link between the heart and the head, because uh, all the qualities that we expect in our speech, once it has been reduced to the minimum, like sincerity, gratitude, and love, they are all qualities of the heart. And it's by establishing that connection that these qualities of the heart will find an expression in the thoughts that the head generates and then translates into words. With that, now I go to the screen sharing again. So we're looking at the reasons why we speak. We often speak to express ideas and opinions and the results of reflection or study. Now, this is something academic, and we may feel that this type of speaking is important, and this may be an exception. But once again, yes, while this is necessary, there is room for austerity here also. And one has to see how far it is necessary to express those ideas and opinions, because when not warranted, they can lead to, because of our egoistic attachment to our own ideas and opinions, it can lead to a sort of a violence of conviction, as the mother calls it, intolerance of somebody else's points of view, and a passion for the preference for our own ideas and opinions. And this can generate unnecessary misunderstandings. So, unless it is really called for, even here, it's better to observe restraint. If it's going to serve a purpose, if it is necessary, then yes, and also then how it is to be done, uh, so that we get what uh, can be the benefit of expression without creating the uh, undesirable consequences of expressing ideas and opinions. So, if we are conscious of it, much bitter and inane controversy can be avoided. Something went wrong and didn't move to the next one. So, anyway. Now, here, it's something important which we uh, are often not conscious of because of our attachment to our own ideas and opinions, that no matter how true and reasonable our idea appears to be, every idea contains a little of the truth or an aspect of the truth, but there's no idea which is in itself absolutely true. So this applies to our ideas as well as somebody else's ideas. Our idea may contain, and it would often contain, a little of the truth, an aspect of the truth, but not the whole of it. And in the same way, the other person's idea also contains that little bit of truth. And it's by a open mind, by looking at somebody else's ideas without a prejudice, without bias, that we can arrive at a larger truth which may still not be the entire truth, but at least truth which is larger, wider, nearer the truth than any of these ideas singly or individually. Now, here's a beautiful book by Susan Cain. Uh, the book is titled Quiet, the Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. So, in this, she basically compares introverts and extroverts. And it seems that the in general, one might say about one third of the people in the world are introverts. They tend to talk less. It's the two-thirds who talk more. And because the introverts are in a minority, it's sometimes also looked upon as an abnormality. The parents are often apologetic about a child who doesn't speak much, who is very shy. Now, whether it's the child is shy or has this inherent tendency to talk less, that can be debated. But all the same, it's sometimes seen as a sort of a defect. But then she also brings out that these persons who are talking less are often thinking more. And therefore, if you have a gathering or a meeting in which somebody is not speaking much, provided this person is given a chance and is able to put in a word, generally this person will talk much more sense than many others who have been very vocal. And uh, gradually, as introverts grow older, as from childhood they move to adulthood, they realize that if they stay so quiet, then it becomes difficult to really function in the world properly. And therefore, they start speaking. They start speaking, but their basic nature actually does not change, which means that they'll still speak less, they'll think more, and speak only when necessary. And at the same time, they do speak when it is required. And that's what really matters. But then, because their basic nature has not changed, they can get quickly exhausted from by a session in which they had to speak because it was required to speak in that setting, and they would much rather then quickly uh, get some time all to themselves when they can stay silent. So now here's a quote from there. There's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. So a person who talks the most doesn't necessarily have the best ideas, and the person who doesn't talk much doesn't mean that the ideas that person is has some poverty of ideas. The person may be having, in fact, some of the best ideas. And about the ideas which are the best, here is beautiful quotes. Certain ideas are able to transform the world. It is these that ought to be expressed. They are the guiding stars in the firmament of the spirit. It is they that will lead the earth towards a supreme realization. So this is the futuristic vision of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, that there is great scope for a greater manifestation, a greater realization of the supreme consciousness on earth. And not only that can change the world, in fact, that sort of a change is imminent in the near future. And that would be the result of an idea. And this very idea that such a thing can happen, which Sri Aurobindo and mother came up with, that itself uh, is something which has stimulated so many of us to think in terms of not just individual salvation, not in terms of individual progress, but the spirituality as a path to a collective change, which will change typical human nature and will improve the world. So, this sort of ideas need to be expressed. Another reason we speak is as a teacher for teaching. Here again, speaking is necessary, but austerity has a place. But then one might say that if one uses the minimum necessary words, then teaching does not remain interesting. And to make it interesting, one needs some distractions, some digressions, some time for relaxation. Say, in case of children, story time, and many other such things. So, relaxation, well, all that has a place, but discernment is necessary. Relaxation can be through inner silence, rest can be achieved by contemplation, and a slackening of effort can lead to felicity. Now, these are some of the things which can be kept in mind so that speech is restrained, but same time, that doesn't mean that there's a degeneration in the quality of the interaction. So, rest and relaxation in teaching should not be a pretext for slipping down. Slipping down in terms of the goals of teaching, in terms of the goal of life, should not be an excuse for forgetting the goal of life. That shouldn't happen. So, relaxation should be into force and light, not into obscurity and weakness, which means something which is frivolous, vulgar, or demeaning, degrading, that should not be find a place in teaching, using relaxation as an excuse. Then speaking on spiritual subjects. It is here that the mother says talkativeness can be, in fact, extremely dangerous. Uh, Sadhaks who have just sort of started knowing more, uh, who are new on the path, they tend to be very enthusiastic. The intentions are good. Oh, I have discovered something wonderful. I want to share it with everybody. And these are the ones who tend to speak a lot, speak also to those who may not be receptive to this type of wisdom, and use far more words to communicate their newfound wisdom than is necessary. So there is a restraint which particularly the new sadhaks have to be conscious of, uh, because speaking just the right amount to only those who are receptive is important, even when talking about spiritual subjects. And here is something which is worth a reflection for people like me. A good many hours of silent concentration are needed to be able to speak usefully for a few minutes. So, saying something useful, even for a few minutes, uh, should represent the distillate of many hours of silent concentration. Then those words become really meaningful and powerful. And not only it should be contemplation and concentration, but also practice. So one should uh, try to speak even on spiritual subjects in as few words as possible, only as much as is necessary. And when it comes to sharing one's inner life and spiritual effort, that is one's personal inner life and the efforts which one personally finds useful, it's better to speak nothing unless absolutely necessary. So the personal element should be kept out. Here is a relevant quote from the Dhammapada, a Buddhist scripture. A man is not versed in Dhamma, that is Dharma, the sense of right and wrong, because he speaks much. He who, after hearing a little Dhamma, that is a little bit of teaching, realizes its truth directly and is not heedless of it, is truly versed in the Dhamma. So it's not the amount that is spoken, but what is realized and experienced. And this, I'm sure Aditi would be very happy to hear, because she always emphasizes this experience being far more important than knowledge. And knowledge becomes truly our own only when we have experienced it. That has always been her consistent stand. In fact, the Zen masters who belong to the Buddhist tradition are very well known for speaking very little. There's a little anecdote or a story, a Zen story, as if a disciple went to a Zen master uh, expecting some guidance. After a prolonged wait, during which the master stayed silent, the master spoke just two words: judge not. So this disciple went away and decided to practice it. After a few years, he came back. Once again, the master was silent. After a long wait, he again spoke just two words, the same two words: judge not. So then this disciple reflected a bit and he realized, yes, through all these years, the efforts that I have made makes me not express my judgment of somebody openly. I don't certainly talk about that person behind his back. And also, I try not to judge him, tell him directly what I think of him. But all the same, in my own mind, I'm still judging people. So I need to do some more work. And that's why I have been given this homework. Once again, judge not. Now, another reason we speak is speaking about one's own spiritual experiences. This, of course, should never be done, but there are exceptions. If a disciple wants to talk to his guru about his personal spiritual experiences, uh, expecting that the guru will be provide some explanation, implication, meaning uh, behind the experience, and maybe give some instructions based on the experience, then it may be justified. When it comes to the guru sharing his or her spiritual experiences with the disciple, uh, once again, there's great caution needed. Generally speaking, no. But if the guru thinks that it may help the disciple in the disciple's sadhana, then it can be communicated without the least sign and without the least bit of boasting. So, boasting has neither to be within nor expressed. And naturally, you know that once that sincerity comes in, the connection between the heart and the head. So, without any sense of self glorification, if the guru can communicate to the disciple with the intention of helping the disciple in his sadhana, then yes, it is permissible. But still, it may, in fact, lower the consciousness of the guru, even when done with utmost care. That also the mother wants. So the guru has to find the balance. To what extent is he prepared to sacrifice his own progress for the sake of the progress of the disciple? So now here is a summary of the reasons we speak, and we have seen each of these situations, and there is scope for speaking much less. For a material reason, to express feelings, to talk about others, to express ideas and opinions, results of reflection or study, for teaching, speaking on spiritual subjects, and about one's spiritual experiences. And words can have a great power. The power depends upon the consciousness that is there behind the word. Uh, that's why the mantras have great power because they were communicated to the rishi or the mystic when the rishi was in a state of peak, at the peak of his consciousness. The words were just communicated from that higher source through that, and that rishi just became a channel for giving them an expression. Uh, so uh, the that sort of truth is acquired by the word when one does not calculate and sort of be very careful about exactly how to formulate the sentence and so on. It just comes, and that comes in the silence of the mind, because only a silent mind that can be an unobstructed channel for communicating the force of that higher consciousness. And one should have a steady and sincere aspiration for spiritual progress, for spiritual growth. Then, in that situation, in that sort of a frame, the words will be just the right words in quantity as well as quality. And the words will have a creative power, which means the words are likely to actually translate into events and action. And when it comes to the words having a creative power, common expressions. Uh, if somebody is saying something which we feel is should not happen, then we tell the person shub shub bolo, just say the nice things, don't say. Or if the person has said something which we are very happy to hear and we only wish that it materializes, we tell the person tumhare muh mein ghee chakkar. huh? So these are expressions which we feel that, well, say bolna hai, but we have to say that, but actually it will not happen just by speaking, but it can actually happen. There's a book by a person, Dr. Larry Dossey, who is well known for uh, bringing into light, the, in the modern world, the power of prayer in healing. He has a beautiful book. The title of the book is uh, "Be Careful What You Pray For. You Just Might Get It." So over to Aditi.
Yes, before we open to participants, if they have any reflections, I just wanted to share when you said no, resting in force and light, I think that really just stayed with me. It really solves everything for us. And from there, one thought came that though we talk about silence so much, there's a silence which we can experience out of fear, that there is so much of confusion in my mind that I'm not finding the right words or I'm too scared to say something, so I better be silent. So there's also, we can practice silence from a space of fear, which is not the true silence which we're talking about. And there's a silence which comes from the space of faith, which has absolute power. So just also to become aware of that, maybe I'm not participating in the world or I'm not sharing what I feel or I think, and I'm covering into the name of spirituality that, oh, I have to follow a certain way. But deep inside, I'm just not sure of who I am, or I'm not sure of what my ideas look like, or what my feelings are worthy of expression or not. So it requires a certain amount of sincerity to experience that power in silence and become aware if there is fear behind the silence. So just as an indicator to know where we are on our journey. So that is what came to me when you were saying, because when we are silent and resting in that force and light, then there's a very different quality to it, and that is what aids our journey. So yeah, that is what I wanted to share. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, any reflections, now is the time to share. Or be silent and practically experience what we have been talking about. That is another option, but yeah, both options are available.
Thank you. May I ask the question, please? Namaste. Yeah. Um, would you please talk about the silence as the punishment of abusers?
Mm. Sorry, Natalia, please can you repeat the question? The silent.
Yes, if you could talk a little bit about the silence as the punishment of abusers.
Uh, as the punishment for of abuse means that abusers be punished by telling them to stay silent.
No, abusers can be silent. No, I mean, in the relationship, right? They can just be silent and avoid any discussion. And the victims, they have the feeling of guilt um, because, yeah, in these situations.
Oh, well, I mean that. Uh, I mean, silence can be used in negative ways. Uh, in fact, I won't talk to you. You know, that sort of
Mm,
an approach. That is one. Giving the partner silent treatment, as it is called.
mm,
That
Yeah.
itself becomes a punishment for the partner. And another thing is that sometimes, the person is an abuser, but at the same time, he is unwilling to have a discussion.
mm,
So, uh, that silence is not really sort of warranted, because here a discussion may be necessary. So that's why we have to see when is it that talking is really necessary. And the person perhaps is keeping silent because the person knows that there is the person if the person speaks the truth and is sincere about it, then the person will not be able to defend himself.
mm.
So yes, I mean, you pointed out a good sort of situation in which silence is probably not the best thing to observe, and uh, it's sincerity behind the expression which is important, not avoiding expression altogether because the person is afraid of being sincere.
Okay. Thank you.
Aditi, would you like to add anything?
Uh, no, just that the silence which the question is speaking about is more that comes from the need to control. And the silence which we are talking about is that silence more from that space of expression and sharing. So that is, yeah. I think somebody wanted to say
I think
something. Is that?
Aishwarya wants to say something.
Yes,
Please go on.
I have a few questions, which is first regarding what you said, sharing spiritual experiences with your guru or maybe a mentor. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And you also said, Dr. Bijlani, that it's a sacrifice on the teacher's part to share the experience. And I never understood this because I have read this a few times or heard this. Because, yeah, if it's maybe it's not the space of boosting, but even then, like, it's the common mention is that it's not supposed to be spoken about. But I feel otherwise, how would one understand or the necessity? I mean, because I feel I have a lack of faith and I need a confirmation bias, and then like what I'm experiencing, sometimes I feel is only my own unique experience. But when I only hear from others, I understand that oh, it's not only something special about me, which helped me a lot at least to know that this is a common. So only when I spoke to different people or different people shared their experience with me, or like it became it was not a teacher or it's not a guru, then that so I have this confusion always when I hear this about it not being useful to share the experience. And the other question I have is about self gossip. We know we're talking to ourselves and the mind has to be silent, but there is a part which goes on mechanically, or like we can observe it and know what is going on. But until we reach, and I don't even think it's possible for me to have a silent mind at the point. And I feel the best is to replace the self-talk with something else. Sometimes it could be just some lines of some contemplation or something I read or something which touched me. Is that the way about it, or just passive observation and learning to quieten the mind, like rejecting the thoughts? I still don't understand this idea of thoughts coming from outside, or but still, like I don't. That's what I want to ask about. How to control self-gossip and sometimes. Okay.
Okay, maybe I'll just quickly share my thoughts and then if Dr. Vajlani has to add something. It's more from the perspective of when we talk about sharing our experiences, the core depends on what is my intention of sharing. If my intention of sharing is learning, if my intention of sharing is validation, if my intention of sharing is to know more, it all comes down to that. So while even before the step of sharing, even in my articulation, there is dilution of experience. So such experiences just come in a flash. The moment even my outer personality wants to hold it, there's a dilution. Then there's an articulation, and then there's sharing in the world. So it all depends on what is the space, who are the people, why am I sharing, and it is very individual too. So we have a common guideline that that should be done, that should not be done, and then it comes to an individual experiencer. What is the space? What is the purpose? And that, of course, the more we work on our sincerity, we know if that needs to come out or that doesn't need to come out, if there's a purpose or there's not a purpose. So that there's one way of looking at it. Another aspect of self-talk and replacing it, of course, observation helps us. Like I said, that the moment there is silence in speech, there's observation of thought. But if I observe there's a lot of self-talk which is not so healthy, then of course I can introduce anchoring myself in different things on the outside. So I can anchor, say, like, especially in the context of integral yoga, I can anchor myself in, say, the pictures of the masters. I can anchor myself in the words of the master. I can just anchor myself in doing an activity. So if something which is not comfortable for me being in the mind, I can bring myself in the physical aspect, which is more pure than the objectivity of my mind. So just that effort of knowing in what space what is required, and then slowly building it as a part of my exercise. Because some people can sit silent. So that's what we speak about, no? Active meditation, passive meditation. So just understanding that what is my makeup as a personality and what I can express. Not saying that, okay, of course we learn from others, but the purpose of learning from others is to discover our own understanding and not copy their learnings. So every like knowledge in the world is offered to us as a bouquet. We pick up the flower that suits us. And that is what is honoring our own self is. So that is the space in which you can explore and see what comes out of it. So yeah. So yeah. If you want to add something, Dr. Mishlani.
I don't know whether that was a part of the question, but while she was speaking, one thing that occurred to me was that there was a time when girls who were sexually abused stayed quiet because of the fear of the society actually turning against them, treating the victim as the one who was guilty, and uh, their further life, future life, was also likely to be spoilt by any disclosures. But now the trend is changing, and we have that Me Too movement. That has even old stories are being brought out. So, which is the better stand, to stay quiet the way they used to stay quiet, or speaking up is something which is necessary? Well, in this situation, which speaking up is necessary, but then again, it's the spirit in which the battle is picked up. And there, the Gita can be a good guide, because the battle has been favored, but battle which is fought not against individuals, not because of uh, personal reasons, but the battle which is also looking at the larger context, and primarily at the larger context of defending good against evil. And uh, without attachment to the outcome. The outcome could sometimes be unfavorable to us, but once we are doing it in that spirit of defending good against evil, then we have to be detached from the outcome, and also uh, without hatred for the person who is being blamed. Uh, Arjun was told to kill the Kauravas, but again without hatred for the Kauravas. Very difficult, but all the same, that is the ideal that one said. So, in that sort of a spirit, um, whether it is sexual abuse, or whether it is domestic violence, or any of these crimes which are absolutely indefensible, uh, one can pick up a battle, one should pick up a battle, and that may require naturally some speaking, but then the battle has to be carried out in the spirit of the Gita. I think Preeti had a comment here, and a comment or a question, that different types of speech, tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. Well, I mean, the dominant guna of the person will determine the intention, the thoughts, and the content of the speech. And that is understandable, as it would affect everything else that we do. Everything else is also affected. All our thoughts, feelings, and actions are affected by the dominant guna. So, tamasic speech would reflect the basic ignorance and deluded thinking of the tamas. Rajasic speech would reflect the strong desires, passions, and the egoistic nature of rajas. And sattvic tendencies would reflect the love, harmony, and knowledge, which is the quality of sattva. Kriti, you want to say anything?
Actually, when Natalie had this question on silent abusing, that was the time when it struck me that, there's a spectrum on speech as well. So you can see for yourself also when you are on, sometimes you could be on a tamasic mode or a rajasic mode of speech, and then some days you may feel you're more sattvic, quiet, and more self observing. So And the same way you can see for others as well. So it's a good way to see how you feel when you are on a sattvic mode, and on those days how you feel, and practice more of that. So I think that would bring that change in you. Of course. And I think post COVID, a lot of people have got a lot of time to reflect, and it has brought a lot of change to spend time with yourself. The people who have reflected, I think they may have found a shift in their talk and more of listening and being reflective. That was just an observation.
Thank you. So, just before we close the session, I just wanted to share that the recordings of VS Talks are available on the YouTube channel of VS Spirituality. So, do re-listen if there's less of silence and more of talking when you require, and do share it with people you feel will benefit from this. So yes, thank you everyone. We will end with a minute of silence, and yeah, thank you.